The cell. What distinguishes a living organism from an inanimate object? A living organism conducts self-sustaining biological processes. Robert Hooke, one of the first scientists to use a light microscope, discovered the cell in 1665. The cell was defined as the most basic structural and functional unit. Cell theory. Cells are the most basic building units of life. All living things are composed of cells. New cells are made from pre-existing cells, which divide into two. Even a one-celled organism must be organized to perform essential processes: acquire nutrients, excrete waste, detect and respond to stimuli, movement, gas exchange, and grow and reproduce. Each of your individual cells is a compact and efficient form of life, self-sufficient, yet interdependent upon the other cells within your body to supply its needs. Although we define the cell as the most basic unit of life, it's structurally and functionally complex. A cell can be thought of as a mini-organism consisting of tiny organs called organelles. The cell's organelles are isolated from the surrounding environment by a plasma membrane. Unicellular or single-celled organisms can function independently. The cells of multicellular organisms are dependent upon each other and are organized into 5 different levels in order to coordinate their specific functions and carry out all of life's biological processes. Chemical level, cellular, tissue, organ, organ system, and the organism level. Energy is required in order to build molecules into larger macromolecules, and to turn macromolecules into organelles and cells, and then turn those into tissues, organs, and organ systems, and finally into an organism. Proper nutrition provides the necessary nutrients to make the energy that supports life processes. Your body builds new macromolecules from the nutrients in your food. Energy is stored in a nutrient's chemical bonds. Energy comes from sunlight. Plants capture the sunlight and via photosynthesis use it to transform carbon dioxide in the air into glucose. When the glucose bonds are broken, energy is released. Bacteria, plants, and animals, including humans, harvest the energy in glucose via a biological process called cellular respiration. The waste products of cellular respiration are carbon dioxide and water, which plants use to conduct photosynthesis again. Digestion begins even before you put food into your mouth. When you feel hungry, your body sends a message to your brain that it's time to eat. Sights and smells influence your body's preparedness for food. Smelling food sends a message to your brain. Your brain then tells the mouth to get ready, and you start to salivate in preparation for a delicious meal. Digestion converts the food we eat into smaller particles, which will be processed into energy or used as building blocks. Carbohydrates are broken down into glucose, lipids are broken down into fatty acids and glycerol, and proteins are broken down into amino acids. Once you've eaten, your digestive system breaks down the food into smaller components. To do this, it functions on 2 levels, mechanical and chemical. Once the smaller particles have been broken down, they'll be absorbed and processed by cells throughout the body for energy or used as building blocks for new cells. The digestive system is composed of several hollow tube-shaped organs including the mouth, pharynx, esophagus, stomach, small intestine, large intestine, rectum, and anus. The digestive system is lined with mucosal tissue that secretes digestive juices, which aid in the breakdown of food, and mucus, which facilitates the propulsion of food through the tract. Smooth muscle tissue surrounds the digestive tract, and its contraction produces waves, known as peristalsis, that propel food down the tract. Nutrients as well as some non-nutrients are absorbed. Substances such as fiber get left behind and are appropriately eliminated. The four steps of the digestive process are ingestion, chemical and mechanical digestion, absorption, and elimination. The first step of the digestive process is ingestion, which is the collection of food into the digestive tract. It may seem a simple process, but ingestion involves smelling food, thinking about food, and the involuntary release of saliva in the mouth to prepare for food entry. In the mouth, where the second step of digestion occurs, the mechanical and chemical breakdown of food begins. From the mouth to the stomach. The chemical breakdown of food involves enzymes, which break apart the components in the food. These enzymes are secreted by the salivary glands, stomach, pancreas, and small intestine. Mechanical breakdown starts with mastication, or chewing, in the mouth. The teeth crush and grind large food particles, while saliva initiates the chemical breakdown of food and enables its movement downward. The slippery mass of partially broken down food is called a bolus, which moves down the digestive tract as you swallow. As you swallow, the bolus is pushed from the mouth through the pharynx and into a muscular tube called the esophagus. As it travels through the pharynx, a small flap called the epiglottis closes to prevent choking by keeping food from going into the trachea. Peristaltic contractions in the esophagus propel the food down to the stomach. At the junction between the esophagus and the stomach, there's a sphincter muscle that remains closed until the food bolus approaches. The pressure of the food bolus stimulates the lower esophageal sphincter to relax and open, and food then moves from the esophagus into the stomach. The mechanical breakdown of food is accentuated by the muscular contractions of the stomach and small intestine that mash, mix, slosh, and propel food down the alimentary canal. Solid food takes between 4 and 8 seconds to travel down the esophagus, and liquids take about 1 second. When food enters the stomach, which is a highly muscular organ, powerful peristaltic contractions help mash, pulverize, and churn the food into chyme. Chyme is a semi-liquid mass of partially digested food that also contains gastric juices secreted by cells in the stomach. Cells in the stomach also secrete hydrochloric acid and the enzyme pepsin that chemically breaks down food into smaller molecules. The stomach has 3 basic tasks: to store food, to mechanically and chemically break down food, and to empty partially broken down food into the small intestine. The small intestine is divided into 3 structural parts: the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. Once the chyme enters the duodenum, the first segment of the small intestine, the pancreas and gallbladder are stimulated and release juices that aid in digestion. The pancreas secretes up to 1.5 liters of pancreatic juice through a duct into the duodenum per day. This fluid consists mostly of water, but it also contains bicarbonate ions that neutralize the acidity of the stomach-derived chyme and enzymes that further break down proteins, carbs, and lipids. The gallbladder secretes a much smaller amount of bile to help digest fats, also through a duct that leads to the duodenum. Bile is made in the liver and stored in the gallbladder. Bile's components act like detergents by surrounding fats, similar to the way dish soap removes grease from a frying pan. This allows for the movement of fats into the watery environment of the small intestine. Similar to what occurs in the esophagus and stomach, peristalsis is circular waves of smooth muscle contraction that propel food forward. Segmentation sloshes food back and forth in both directions, promoting further mixing of the chyme. Almost all the components of food are completely broken down to their simplest unit within the first 25 centimeters of the small intestine. The next step of digestion is nutrient absorption, and it takes place in the remaining length of the small intestine, or the ileum. The small intestine is perfectly structured for maximizing nutrient absorption. Its surface area is greater than 200 square meters, which is about the size of a tennis court. The surface area of the small intestine increases by multiple levels of folding. The internal tissue of the small intestine is covered in villi, which are tiny finger-like projections that are covered with even smaller projections called microvilli. The digested nutrients pass through the absorptive cells of the intestine via diffusion or special transport proteins. Amino acids and monosaccharides, sugars, are transported from the intestinal cells into capillaries, but the much larger emulsified fatty acids, fat-soluble vitamins, and other lipids are transported first through the lymphatic vessels, which soon meet up with blood vessels. Nutrients absorbed in the small intestine travel mainly to the liver through the hepatic portal vein. Any food that's still incompletely broken down and the food's indigestible fiber content moves from the small intestine to the large intestine, sometimes called the colon, through a connecting valve. The main task of the large intestine is to reabsorb water. Remember, water is present not only in solid foods, but also the stomach releases a few hundred milliliters of gastric juice and the pancreas adds approximately another 500 milliliters during the digestion of the meal. In the large intestine, no further chemical or mechanical breakdown of food takes place, unless it's accomplished by the bacteria that inhabit this portion of the digestive tract. The great majority of bacteria in the large intestine are harmless, and some are even beneficial. The number of bacteria residing in the large intestine is estimated to be greater than 10 to the 14th power. After a few hours in the stomach, plus 3 to 6 hours in the small intestine, and about 16 hours in the large intestine, the digestion process enters step 4, which is the elimination of indigestible food as feces. Feces contain indigestible food and gut bacteria, almost 50% of the content. It's stored in the rectum until it is expelled through the anus via defecation. The first stop of most absorbed nutrients is the liver. One of the liver's primary functions is to regulate metabolic homeostasis. Metabolic homeostasis may be defined as when the nutrients consumed and absorbed matches the energy required to carry out life's biological processes. Simply put, nutrient energy intake equals energy output. The liver is the only organ in the human body that's capable of exporting nutrients for energy production to other tissues. Therefore, when a person is in between meals or a fasted state, the liver exports nutrients, and when a person has just eaten, a fed state, the liver stores nutrients within itself. Nutrient levels and the hormones that respond to their levels in the blood provide the input so that the liver can distinguish between the fasted and fed states and distribute nutrients appropriately. The circulatory system's main function is to transport nutrients to cells and wastes from cells. Nutrients absorbed in the small intestine travel mainly to the liver through the hepatic portal vein. From the liver, nutrients travel upward through the inferior vena cava to the heart. The heart forcefully pumps the nutrient-rich blood first to the lungs to pick up some oxygen, and then to all other cells in the body. The central nervous system. The human brain is estimated to contain over 100 billion neurons. Neurons form the core of the central nervous system, which consists of the brain, spinal cord, and other nerve bundles in the body. The main function of the central nervous system is to sense changes in the external environment and create a reaction to them. Every day, the brain uses over 20% of the energy obtained from nutrients. Its main fuel is glucose, and only in extreme starvation will it use anything else. For acute mental alertness and clear thinking, glucose must be systematically delivered to your brain. Recent scientific studies demonstrate that having continuously high blood glucose levels substantially elevates the risk for developing Alzheimer's disease. The muscular system. The muscular system allows the body to move voluntarily, but it also controls involuntary movements of other organ systems, such as heartbeat in the circulatory system and peristaltic waves in the digestive system. Each movement uses up cellular energy, and without an adequate energy supply, muscle function suffers. Muscle, like the liver, can store the energy from glucose in the large polymetric molecule glycogen. But, unlike the liver, muscle uses up all of their own stored energy and don't export it to other organs in the body. When muscle energy stores are diminished, muscle contraction weakens. In order to avoid hitting the wall, athletes consume large amounts of carbohydrates before and during events to ensure enough glucose is available for optimal performance. The endocrine system is responsible for regulating appetite, nutrient absorption, storage, and usage. The glands in the endocrine system are the pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenals, thymus, pineal, pancreas, ovaries, and testes. The glands secrete hormones, which are biological molecules that regulate cellular processes in other target tissues, so they require transportation by the circulatory system. Probably the most popularized connection between nutrition and the functions of the endocrine system is that unhealthy dietary patterns are linked to obesity and the development of type 2 diabetes. The immune system is comprised of several types of white blood cells that circulate in the blood and lymph. Their jobs are to seek, recruit, attack, and destroy foreign invaders, such as bacteria and viruses. Immune system functions are completely dependent on dietary nutrients. In fact, malnutrition is the leading cause of immune system deficiency worldwide. When protein and/or energy intake is low, the immune system can't perform its functions. Other nutrients such as zinc, selenium, copper, folate, and the vitamins A, B6, C, D, and E all provide benefits to immune system function. Deficiencies in these nutrients can cause an increased risk for infection and even death. Zinc supplementation has been found to be therapeutically beneficial for the treatment of leprosy, tuberculosis, pneumonia, and the common cold. Energy can be defined as the quantity of work a particular system can perform. Energy is classified as either potential or kinetic. Potential energy is stored energy, or energy waiting to happen. Kinetic energy is energy in motion. Some basic forms of energy are thermal or heat energy, chemical energy, electrochemical energy, and others. The amount of energy and nutrients can be quantified into specific units that can be measured. The unit of measurement that defines the energy contained in an energy-yielding nutrient is called a calorie. A calorie is the amount of energy in the form of heat that's required to heat 1 gram of water 1 degree Celsius. To measure the number of calories in a particular food substance, a certain amount of food is burned in a device called a calorimeter. A kilocalorie, or a calorie, is the amount of heat generated by a particular macronutrient that raises the temperature of 1 kilogram of water 1 degree Celsius. A kilocalorie of energy performs 1,000 times more work than a calorie. Carbohydrates yield 4 kilocalories per gram. Proteins yield 4, fats yield 9, and alcohol yields 7 kilocalories per gram. To calculate the contribution of each macronutrient to the total kilocalories in a serving, multiply the number of grams by the number of kilocalories yielded per gram of nutrient. When nutrients and energy are in short supply, cells, tissues, organs, and organ systems don't function properly. Unbalanced diets can cause diseases, and conversely, certain illnesses and diseases can cause an inadequate intake and absorption of nutrients, simulating the health consequences of an unbalanced diet. Examples of nutrition-related disorders include Gerd, irritable bowel syndrome, celiac disease, and food allergies. Gastroesophageal reflux disease, or Gerd, is a persistent form of acid reflux that occurs more than 2 times per week. Acid reflux occurs when the acidic contents of the stomach leak backward into the esophagus and cause irritation. It's estimated that Gerd affects 25 to 35% of the U.S. population. The most common Gerd symptom is heartburn, but people with Gerd may also experience regurgitation, which is the flow of the stomach's acidic contents into the mouth, frequent coughing, and trouble swallowing. Gerd is much more prevalent in people who are obese. The sphincter that separates the stomach's internal contents from the esophagus often doesn't function properly, and acidic gastric contents seep upward. In addition to having an unbalanced high-fat diet, some people with Gerd are sensitive to particular foods: chocolate, garlic, spicy foods, fried foods, and tomato-based foods, which worsen their symptoms. Drinks containing alcohol or caffeine may also worsen their symptoms. Gerd is diagnosed most often by a history of the frequency of recurring symptoms. A more proper diagnosis can be made when a doctor inserts a small device into the lower esophagus that measures the acidity of the contents during one's daily activities. Sometimes a doctor may use an endoscope. A condition known as Barrett's esophagus may develop over time in some people who have Gerd. Irritable bowel syndrome, or IBS, is characterized by muscle spasms in the colon that result in abdominal pain, bloating, constipation, and/or diarrhea. Interestingly, IBS produces no permanent structural damage to the large intestine, as often happens to patients who have Crohn's disease or inflammatory bowel disease. It's estimated that 1 in 5 Americans displays symptoms of IBS. The disorder is more prevalent in women than in men. 2 primary factors that contribute to IBS are an unbalanced diet and stress. There's no specific test to diagnose IBS, but other conditions that have similar symptoms, such as celiac disease, must be ruled out. This involves stool tests, blood tests, and having a colonoscopy. Symptoms of IBS significantly decrease a person's quality of life as they're present for at least 12 consecutive or non-consecutive weeks in a year. Large meals and foods high in fat and added sugars are those that contain wheat, rye, barley, peppermint, and chocolate intensify or bring about symptoms of IBS. Additionally, beverages containing caffeine or alcohol may worsen IBS. Stress and depression compound the severity and frequency of IBS symptoms. As with Gerd, the first treatment approaches for IBS are diet and lifestyle modifications. Other recommendations are to eat slower, add more fiber to the diet, drink more water, and to exercise. There are some medications to treat IBS and the resulting diarrhea or constipation. Sometimes antidepressants and drugs to relax the colon are prescribed. Celiac disease is an autoimmune disorder affecting between 0.5 and 1% of Americans. That is, 1 in every 1 to 200 people. It's caused by an abnormal immune reaction of small intestine cells to a type of protein called gluten. For those who are sensitive to gluten, it's good to know that corn, millet, buckwheat, and oats do not contain the proteins that make gluten. Not everyone with celiac is diagnosed. Many have silent or latent celiac disease. Celiac disease is most common in people of European descent, and it's rare in people of African American, Japanese, and Chinese descent. It's much more prevalent in women and in people with type 1 diabetes, autoimmune thyroid disease, and Down and Turner syndromes. Symptoms can range from mild to severe and can include pale, fatty, loose stools, gastrointestinal upset, abdominal pain, weight loss, and in children, a failure to grow and thrive. Celiac disease diagnosis requires a blood test and a biopsy of the small intestine. Because celiac disease is an autoimmune disease, antibodies produced by white blood cells circulate in the body and can be detected in the blood. When gluten-containing foods are consumed, the antibodies attack the cells lining the small intestine, leading to a destruction of the small villi projections. This tissue damage can be detected with a biopsy, a procedure that removes a portion of tissue from the damaged organ. Villi destruction is what causes many of the symptoms of celiac disease. The destruction of the absorptive surface of the small intestine also results in the malabsorption of nutrients, so that while people with this disease may eat enough, nutrients don't make it into the bloodstream because absorption is reduced. The effects of nutrient malabsorption are most apparent in children and the elderly, as they are especially susceptible to nutrient deficiencies. Food allergies are one of the many ways in which different body makeups affect nutritional concerns. Although an estimated 12 million Americans have food allergies, there are likely many more people who say they have food allergies than actually do. This is because food sensitization is different from a medically determined food allergy. When someone has a food allergy, the immune system mistakenly attacks a certain kind of food, such as peanuts, as if it were a threat, and IgE antibodies are produced. Food allergy symptoms usually develop within a few minutes to 2 hours after a person has eaten a food to which they are allergic. These symptoms can range from the annoying to the potentially fatal, and they include a tingling mouth, swelling tongue and/or throat, difficulty breathing, hives, stomach cramps, diarrhea, vomiting, drop in blood pressure, loss of consciousness, and even death. There are no clear treatments for food allergies. Epinephrine is sometimes used to control severe reactions, and individuals with known and dangerous allergies may get prescriptions for self-injectable devices. The only certain way to avoid allergic reactions to food is to avoid the foods that cause them. Beyond avoidance, this can mean reading food labels carefully, or even calling manufacturers for product information. 90% of food allergies are caused by these 8 foods: milk, eggs, peanuts, tree nuts, fish, shellfish, wheat, and soy.